What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, November 22nd edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Sorry for the late start today. Was trying to go live at 4:45, but Al Horford got ruled out unexpectedly right before that. So figured I should rerun everything and see how things look. Still have some pretty interesting exposures right now. I'll talk through them. There is at least one spot that is you can see on the screen now, Yabusele. I'm assuming I projected him to start for right now in place of Paul George. He subbed in for him when he got hurt last game. I have no idea if he will start. It easily could be Kelly Oubre. It could be kind of anybody. And then obviously you have the Embiid news too. So that did impact my exposures here, obviously, and I'll talk about that more with the Sixers. But going to go through game by game like I have been on these shows before, looking at the exposures I would have in large field DraftKings tournaments if the slate started right now. As always, I will do my best to touch on injury news that we're waiting on and the potential impacts of that as well. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat. Larry said he is here for the Juan Soto contract talk. I think I lost like 100 brain cells trying to explain how franchise values and inflation work, but glad to not be talking about that anymore. So moving on to NBA, Brooklyn taking on the Sixers in the first game tonight, about a 4 or 5 point spread in this one. I'm not getting to anything on the Brooklyn side. The field's not really either. You have this team healthy. Cam Thomas missed the last game, was ruled out not long before lock, and that opened up value in that one. Nick Claxton was also out in that game. They are both back today, along with Dorian Finney-Smith, who already was back, but was on the injury report. He is also available to play. My expectation is that Claxton gets the start, plays like 25, 26 minutes. Simmons plays around 24 off the bench. I projected it that way. If we get Simmons in the starting lineup, you can give him an extra minute or so. But either way, I do expect you'll pretty much see a split between the two of them. And it makes it so at their respective salaries, it's pretty tough to want to get to either one. Cam Thomas, shooting guard, small forward eligible at 6,900. Obviously, he can kind of score at will, or at least he will shoot at will and may or may not score, depending on if he's able to actually knock down shots. I gave him 33 minutes here. That's 1 minute less than he's averaging for the season. The Nets being kind of fully healthy here did make me sort of knock everybody down a little bit. There is still the potential, if he does get hot, he plays more minutes. There is volatility there as well. So I think he is the guy that I would get to first. He's the only guy I'm getting to at all from the Nets. But even that, I don't have much. I am a little bit below the field. But I do agree with the field that he is the first net that I would get to, or the best play from the Nets. On the Sixers side, things are a lot more interesting. Joel Embiid is questionable. He missed shoot around today. I have no idea. I projected him in. It's the first game of the slate, so I don't have to think about it too much. We'll have that information. But I don't know what's going on with the Sixers. Seems like terrible vibes there in addition to terrible basketball. No Paul George. He's hurt. Again, no Kyle Lowry. He's out again. Tyrese Maxey came back last game. He played 5 minutes in the first half, ended up playing about 20 or 21 minutes for the game. I projected him for 26 here. Could play more, I guess. Could play less. Just kind of felt like a good number kind of in the middle of where I think he could possibly play. It doesn't get him into lineups. Yabusele, I mentioned it at the top. I projected him for 26 minutes. He subbed in for Paul George when he got hurt at the very beginning of the third quarter last game. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's the one that gets to start today, but I gave him those minutes, and I'm getting to 49%. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that if he does start and is projected for 26 minutes, he's going to look like a pretty good value at $3,600. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'd still be playing around 50%, because this is using an ownership projection of only about 8%, which is impacted by the fact that the industry isn't projecting him for as many minutes as I did. So there are kind of just moving parts there. But the gist of it, I think, is that if Yabusele starts, whether it's for Embiid or for Paul George, he is going to look like a good value here at 3,600. He would look better, of course, if Embiid's out and he's starting for somebody, whether it's alongside Drummond or in place of Embiid, just because then it opens up even more minutes for him to play, because we know that they've used him at center basically this season as well. So there are a couple different ways that he can end up being valuable, including the way that I projected going into this show. Joel Embiid, if he's in, I think is pretty interesting in tournaments. only projected for 6-7% ownership here at $10,100. And he did play 35 minutes in their last game. You don't have Paul George now. You have a banged up Tyrese Maxey. So there is a ton of upside at a pretty reasonable price tag for Embiid. Now that he's not on a minutes restriction, he's been back long enough that we've seen him play big minutes. So if he does play, I think he's playing enough that he looks pretty good at this price. I only gave him 33 minutes, and he was still getting into lineups. And then Jared McCain at 6,500. I'm a little surprised that his ownership is as low as it is, given the way he's been playing lately. But the thing for me is the playing time. There's really nobody stopping him from playing huge minutes here, even if you assume that Tyrese Maxey does play more than he did last game. When you project these minutes out with no Paul George, with no Kyle Lowry, I'm already giving like 16 minutes to Reggie Jackson, like 14 minutes to Eric Gordon. I think 12 minutes to Council. It's just a really gross rotation of guys behind Jared McCain, and they've been playing him huge minutes. So even though the salary has increased, and even though his point per minute fantasy production kind of has to come back down to earth, unless he's just one of the greatest NBA players ever, just the playing time at this price at low ownership makes him interesting to me in tournaments. Christopher Falter said, how many lines are you basing your percentages on? Today, 150. I'm playing 150 in the $8. A lot of times for this show, it's 50. That's typically what I play in the $15. But for me today, it's 150. So those are the three I'm getting to here. Caleb Martin not getting any ownership. Probably plays around 34 minutes at 5,100, but I'm not getting to him. Oubre could end up in the starting lineup. He's 5,700. I still projected him for 29 minutes, even assuming he comes off the bench. So if he starts, you probably go a little bit higher than that, but still probably just kind of ends up looking like a secondary option because he's still going to have to be competing with Embiid and Maxey and McCain for looks. Now, if Embiid's out, obviously everybody else starts to look better too, because not only are there more minutes available, but there's also more scoring opportunities, all of that, more production available for those guys. So huge news that we're waiting on in that one, but fortunately it is the first game of the slate. Boston taking on the Wizards in a very good spot. A little surprised here that I didn't get any Cornet, but taking on the Wizards in a very good spot. Huge favorites here, massive total, and Power mentioned it. Horford's out. Boston needs to win and score about 140. So, you could get extra minutes here for Boston. I don't know necessarily how much they care, but they are a team that, has incentive here to play a little bit more. I didn't go crazy with the minutes projections, but I also didn't knock minutes off of guys like I normally would in a game that has, a 17-point spread against one of the worst teams in the NBA. I went 36 for Tatum. I went 36 for Brown. I went 29 or 30 for Holiday. His minutes have just kind of been all over the place. 34 for Derek White. So I did project pretty healthy minutes to these guys. Derek White, the field's getting to 22%. I'm getting to 11. Keda's the guy that I'm getting to the most here. I assume he's starting in place of Horford. Projected him for 26 minutes at 4,400. Just makes him look like a pretty good value in a good spot. Jaylen Brown, right around the field at 23%. 8,200, shooting guard, small forward. Obviously has the upside to be the top scorer any given game for the Celtics. So that's nice. Tatum looks good at 19% ownership at 10.4. Derek White, again, getting to 11%. Fields a little bit higher, which, I think he's fine at 6,900, but there's also just going to be a lot of other players you can get to in that price range and at the guard positions. So I don't mind that I'm not getting a ton of White, but if I were to get more, that would also be fine. Peyton Pritchard showing up around 10% of the time for me. He can certainly step into more minutes potentially here. I projected him right around his season average at 26 or 27, but if he plays well, he can play more. He's only 5K in a good spot. Sam Hauser, 3,500. Field is getting to him a bit. I am getting some, but less. I went 21 minutes for him. If he plays well, he could play more. There is also the potential for these guys to play more too, because we don't know exactly what Boston's rotation will look like as far as the number of bodies in it. I projected the center minutes to be split between Keda and Cornet, with Tillman, maybe playing a couple. I gave Jared Walsh basically a rotation and a half. But if he doesn't play, then you're talking about even more minutes, probably either for Pritchard and Hauser or for the starters, kind of depending on how short they go with this rotation. So there is, kind of that out for Sam Hauser as well. But again, this matchup with Washington made me project it a little bit deeper, just because I don't think they need to run their starters into the ground to accomplish what they need to accomplish in this game. Washington is an incredibly bad team at basically everything. Drew Holiday, 5,300, I think is fine. Holiday probably has, I don't know if I would say the most minutes volatility on this team, but of the starters, he probably does. Like White's averaging 34 minutes per game. Tatum and Brown are averaging 36 minutes per game. Holiday has games where he plays 32, 33, but then like even in their last game against Cleveland, a game where it was, a marquee matchup, you got a lot of playing time from main pieces on both teams. Holiday played like 28 minutes. So it's tough to project him for 32 here, but if he plays 32, he'd look great at 5,300. If he plays 28, he looks fine. Like I said, I went 29 or 30 and pretty much around the field there, but I do think he's an interesting spot just because you do have playing time volatility there as well. On the Washington side, Coulibaly is back today, so nothing's going to really stand out from the Wizards. Obviously, a tough matchup for them as well. Somebody said that Tillman's in the G League. He's not on the injury report. Scherer is on assignment. Watson's out in the G League. Peterson and Davison are listed with the G League. Tillman's not listed, so I assume that Tillman is available, but only gave him 2 minutes either way. For the Wizards, I am getting to Joval some, getting to 17%, Fields at 7. This is pretty much just he's 4,800. He's a good point per minute guy. I gave him 19 or 20 minutes, which is what he's averaging for the season. If this game really gets out of hand, then you're probably going to get a little bit less playing time. But even in the game against the Knicks, the last time the Wizards played, where they got absolutely run off the floor, you still got 18 minutes from Joval. So I think, typically you're getting 18 to 20 minutes from him. And at 4,800 in low ownership, I'm just interested because of the upside that he offers. It's unlikely that he plays a ton of minutes, but he just doesn't really need to at this price. He's producing 1.35 DraftKings points per minute so far this season. Kyle Kuzma, I'm getting the 5% at 6,600. I mentioned it in the Knicks game the other day, and then obviously we didn't see it because the Wizards were awful, and certainly that could happen again today. But we've seen Kuzma get up to like 29 minutes since coming back from injury. We haven't seen him exceed that, but we also haven't seen what he's actually going to play if the game is competitive. So I projected 28 or 29 minutes here, and as you can see, I didn't get a lot of him. But I do think there's kind of an interesting case to be made where if the Wizards hang in this game, you could actually get 32, 33 minutes from Kuzma. We don't know. And if that's the case, especially when you combine that with if the Wizards hang in this game, it's pretty likely that Kuzma's scoring because there's not that many guys on the Wizards that can score enough to hang in this game. It does make him interesting to me as a low-owned guy in tournaments. Same can be said for Jordan Poole, but he is $400 more expensive and at a position that typically has higher opportunity cost. So I'm not getting as much of him as I am Kuzma. Not that I'm getting a lot of Kuzma either. Golden State now running 12-man rotations, and Steve Kerr seems like he wants to continue doing it. Mostly that's going to make them not look great, but there are a couple of spots that we can look to here. Trace Jackson Davis showing up 22% of the time for me right now, 10% projected ownership. I don't really like this one. I might end up taking a minute off of him. I projected 19. I think I could go to 18. So I probably will walk that back a little bit. But we have seen his playing time creep up a little bit more recently. Played a lot in Golden State's last game. But even that, it was kind of like a shaky rotation that I'm not super confident is replicated. He only played like 7 minutes in the first half. Then he played 5.5 minutes to open the third quarter. And then he played 9.5 minutes to open the third. And that was a spot where towards the end of that, the Warriors went on a 10 or a 12-2 run. And the game kind of got out of hand. So I think you kind of maybe saw him stay in a little bit longer. But at the same time, he was out there with the starters for a lot of that with Waters, Green, Wiggins, and Curry. So we've kind of seen Looney getting phased out at least a little bit. We've seen Jackson Davis playing a little bit more. So I think I'll probably end up at projecting 18 minutes for him instead of 19, which will pull down my exposure to him at a little bit. But it is still an interesting price tag for him when in their recent games he played 22 last game, he played 20 the game before that, 18 the game before that. Looney played in 2 of those games, playing 13 and 12. So I do think he's interesting at low ownership, but again, not a ton of confidence there. You have Steve Kerr just playing everybody he possibly can, and that is just going to lead to some floor minute games for guys. Andrew Wiggins at 5,400, I think looks pretty good. He's one of the guys on this team that you can have some confidence at least in his playing time. typically going to give you 28 to 30 minutes, but if he plays well, he could play more. Not getting much ownership. He's cheap. He's Ford eligible, so I like that. And then I'm just getting the small amounts of Waters, Draymond, Steph Curry. Nothing, really interesting to say about any of them, I don't think. Steph is obviously really good. Lindy Waters is really cheap and has been starting, although the playing time is kind of all over the place. I projected about 23 minutes, which is what he played last game. I think on average, that's about where he settles in, like 22 to 23 minutes. But you can have some games where he plays, 30, like I think we saw a couple games ago. You also probably do have some games where he plays like 16, which obviously isn't great. So just kind of mixing him in a little bit. On the Pels side, I honestly do not know how to project this team. Brandon Ingram is likely to play. Jordan Hawkins is expected back. Trey Murphy is back. Misi is questionable. He played last game, but only played 18 minutes. I don't know what the starting lineup looks like here. I don't know if Jordan Hawkins is limited. I don't know if he just jumps right back into the starting lineup and plays a bunch. I projected him to start, but only gave him 26 minutes for right now. That's a little bit higher than at least some other places in the industry I looked, and he's still not getting into lineups for me at 5,700. My guess at the starting lineup was Ingram, Hawkins, Boston, Murphy, and Misi. But again, other than Murphy and Ingram, all of that is pretty much up in the air right now. So right now, I'm not really getting to much from this game. Murphy looks like the spot that I would get to first. He's who the field is getting the most of. But even that at 5,900, I'm coming in a bit below the field. Ingram, you can always make the upside case for him, but he's also 9K, which isn't great. I actually have more of him than Murphy. I sorted by the wrong category, but only 6% Ingram, 2% Murphy. Not really getting to this team too much. Maybe get to them a little bit more once we have some clarity on the starting lineup, or if, I don't know, we get a report like Jordan Hawkins isn't limited, because then, you project him for probably 30 plus minutes. So it's a really difficult team to project. Also, I don't know exactly how deep the rotation goes here. I projected Reeves to play a little bit. I projected Kane to play like 16 minutes. Maybe Reeves is out of the rotation like he had been prior to his last really good game. Maybe Kane's out of the rotation and Reeves jumps him. I don't know. But it's a pretty messy team right now that, for the most part, I'm not getting much of. Portland, Q tags here on Anthony Simons and Scoot Henderson. DeAndre Ayton is doubtful, which should mean another start for Klingon. I'm getting to Robert Williams the most. So is the field. Field's at 21%. I have 16. He's 4,800. He disappointed last time out. I had a lot of him, but I don't really think that we should take. I don't really think we should take too much away from that game as far as negatives, because we still got the minutes that we want from Robert Williams. He still played 24 and a half minutes off the bench. We've consistently seen him playing those minutes now with Ayton out, and with him being back to being healthy. We know he can play, at least, up to 25 minutes, 24, 25, 25 in his last 3 games. More minutes than Klingon in all 3 of those games as well. The only game recently where Klingon played more than 22 minutes was 3 games ago on the 13th. He played 31 minutes. That's the game that Robert Williams sat out on the second half of the back-to-back. So I think we can feel pretty comfortable that we have Williams kind of like as the closing center and the guy that is likely to get a couple more minutes than Klingon. And that, combined with power forward eligibility, makes him look really good. And we know who Williams is as a fantasy producer. He's always been a very good point per minute guy. It's just a matter of him staying healthy, getting the minutes. But the minutes seem to be there for him right now. Overall this season, 1.27 DraftKings points per minute, which is pretty much in line with his career averages. Shadon Sharp and Klingon getting some ownership. I'm not really getting to them right now. Sharp will look better if one or both of Simons or Henderson sit. But I went 32 minutes here. I'm a little concerned about this Portland rotation if both those guys are in, because you just have a lot of bodies now. Like, you would have Simons, Henderson, if they're both in. You have those two, but you've had Banton playing well. I think he's probably still in the rotation. Avdia is going to get his 20 minutes, give or take. You have obviously Grant getting his minutes. So it just becomes tough to give a ton of minutes to these guys. I gave 32 to Sharp, but again, I think he plays more if one or both of Simons, Henderson are out. And I think Banton also certainly benefits if one or both of those guys are out as well. If Simons is out and Henderson is in, Henderson starts to look pretty good at 5,200 too. So a lot of moving parts here on Portland, but with the way I have it projected right now, Robert Williams, the only guy that I'm really getting much of. Emwald said he's been loving Klingon as a pivot in GPPs. I haven't really been getting to him much since I've been after seeing how they're running the rotation with Robert Williams and the fact that he's still getting ownership. I think it would be a little bit different if there was just like no ownership coming into him, but he's getting enough where I don't really like it where I only have him projected for like 22 minutes. On the other side of this one, the Rockets, 117 team total here, and they are a team that I believe benefits from scoring a lot of points tonight. They are near the top or at the top of their group. Why? Oh, if I missed Grant being questionable. If Grant's out, then probably obvious starts for him. Just another moving piece for this team. I forgot to mention him, but Simons, Henderson, Grant. So yeah, if Grant's out, you probably get Denny, but also it's the Blazers. They could kind of do whatever they want. It doesn't matter. But on the Houston side here, I do think this team looks really good. I'm getting a lot of exposure to this team, and I figured I would be. The field is getting there too. Dylan Brooks is only $3,800. He is getting 18% ownership. I am getting an uncomfortable amount of him. The minutes for Houston guys lately, you need to be cautious with like reading too much into those because they've been in several very big blowouts. And obviously they could blow Portland out here tonight too. They are double-digit favorites at home. But for the season, Dylan Brooks is averaging 30 minutes per game. Over his last three, he's averaging 23 and a half. And a lot of that has just been massive blowouts recently. He played 28 3 games ago. He played 33 the game before that. He played 30 the game before that. I projected 29 or 30 minutes here. I think if this game is like truly competitive, he could certainly play more. So I like getting him at $3,800. He's obviously not a great fantasy producer, but I just expect him to be on the floor enough in a good spot that I like getting to him. Van Vliet at 7,200 looks fine to me, probably playing 34, 35 minutes. I think he looks good. Şengün, 23% projected ownership. I'm getting to 30% at 8,400. His playing time has looked pretty good lately as well when he's not in foul trouble. He did get in some foul trouble early in the last game, and then you had the blowout as well. So he only got up to 28 minutes, played 39 the game before that, 26 the game before that, 33, 30. I have him in for 31 or 32 minutes. This is also, we haven't totally seen it lately because games have been gotten out of hand, but we've kind of seen Houston toying around with their center rotation too, not necessarily playing a backup behind Şengün for the full allotment of minutes. Not only has that been good for Şengün, but it's also been good for Jabari Smith, who's getting a little bit more run at the five when he avoids foul trouble and blowouts. We've seen some games where he plays a lot. One of the blowout games, I think against the Bulls a few games ago, he actually played 35 minutes without getting garbage time run. Last game, you got 30 minutes from him, again, without garbage time run. I projected 30 here, which I think is a little bit higher than the industry's at. It's getting him into lineups at a rate a little bit higher than the industry. 4,600 looks like a pretty good price tag for him. Happy to get to Jalen Green at 6,400. So all the starters look good for me here. And then I think if you want to mix in some Amen Thompson or Tari Eason off the bench, both of those guys are fine as well. I've mentioned it in the past with Eason specifically, but you really want to be careful looking at his recent minutes because he's kind of like the first guy to lose minutes if the game's a blowout, but he's live to close games if it's not. Not that he always will close, but he can find his way into the closing lineup potentially when it is close. So he's somebody where like you can see several 21, 22-minute games in a row. It doesn't mean that if the game's competitive, he's not playing 25, 26. So the upside for him is there. The problem is just that he's also up to $5,700. Amen Thompson's playing time has been down a bit lately. Overall this season, though, averaging around 25 minutes per game, which I think is a reasonable projection. He's live to play 28, 29. He's also live to play 17 like he did last game. So at 5,100, I think he's okay. Not going too crazy on him, but I don't really mind. The field's 12% ownership there. Steven said Sixers Nets props just locked. Yes, hopefully we get some news soon, although that could just be because the injury report's about to come out. Tyrese Maxey will see increased minutes. Yeah, well, he played 20, so I would hope so. Like I said, I projected 26. I think you could probably go to like 28 if you wanted to. Still don't think that I'm going to end up getting to him much tonight unless we get word that like he's playing 30 plus. Indiana taking on Milwaukee, two teams that do not like each other in an NBA Cup game. I am getting way more Halliburton than I would like. $8,100 price tag is nice. 16% ownership is reasonable. I do have some concerns with one of the weirder splits that I've seen posted lately, and that is that Tyrese Halliburton has been unable to shoot on the road this year. The reason that I actually care is that he's been it's been reported that he's been dealing with back issues. I don't know if this is like a sleeping in a hotel versus sleeping at home type thing. It's probably still more likely that it's just random noise, but it is kind of something that caught my eye and I don't love. But that being said, 8,100 is just a really cheap price tag for Tyrese Halliburton. I'm getting a lot. I wouldn't be upset if I get a little bit less by the time we get to lock, but I do like that price tag. I like Miles Turner here a lot at 6,500. I think the biggest concern here is foul trouble. Obviously, you have Giannis, attacking the basket and getting fouled frequently, but there is no true backup center active, or they have Moses Brown, but there's no true backup center active for Turner. So you've seen in competitive games for the Pacers since Isaiah Jackson went down, Miles Turner playing huge minutes, and I projected him for 34 here. I think that's slightly higher than a lot of the industry has him. The price tag looks good. This game only has about a 5-point spread on a slate that has a few games with really wide spreads. So I do like Turner a lot. I'm getting him a lot. That's perfectly fine with me. A little bit over the field on Siakam here. It's Siakam. I think that's fine. 7,200 looks fine. And then same goes for Mathurin. $6,400 price tag. If this game's close, probably gives you 34 or 35 minutes. We do also have a couple of questionable players in this one with Ben Shepherd and Jarris Walker. If one or both of those guys are out, it does open up some other stuff. Specifically, we saw Quentin Jackson get the start last game in place of Shepherd. He already has jumped up to 4K, but if he ends up starting today, you could at least, roll the dice on him a little bit. TTID said that must be an extreme split for you to care. Usually you don't care about stuff like that. The only reason I even remembered it or cared at all was the explanation, the pairing it with the fact that he's been dealing with back spasms or whatever. It's still not something that I'm clearly not like nerfing his projection or anything, but I figured I'd mention it just because it was at least an interesting theory, but it's not really doing anything to my DFS play. So to that extent, I guess I don't care, but it was at least interesting enough for me to remember and mention. The other thing here with Halliburton too is obviously if you're playing him in DFS, you would like him to shoot well, but he's a really good playmaker. He's going to get a lot of assists one way or the other. So like he can have good fantasy games even if he's not shooting at a really efficient clip. But you really, obviously, if you're rostering him, would like him to get back to last season where he's a really efficient shooter and he's getting a lot of assists, and producing a ton of fantasy points. So I would be more comfortable with my exposure to him if, I don't know, this were a home game or last season. But still at this ownership, I'm willing to take shots on what I still think is a good player and somebody that, can get assists at a high rate. On the Milwaukee side, not getting to a ton here. Dame showing up the most for me at 12%, Fields at 10%. I like that price tag at 8,900. We haven't really seen the Damian Lillard wins you GPPs single-handedly game yet this year, but they're probably in there somewhere. Probably will happen from time to time. Obviously, he's still a very capable scorer. He's playing big minutes. He's not on reduced minutes or anything after missing a couple of games. So I like getting him as a relatively low tournament play. Giannis is getting 21% ownership at a really high $12,100 price tag. I'm getting some, but not as much as the field. If you can get to Giannis, great. I think that obviously the more injury news and clarification we get, the easier he would be to get to as well. Like if we get confirmation that, we get Embiid out and confirmation that Yabusele is starting, then that's just somebody that, you're projecting more minutes to, and you can play him at power forward, and it's just going to open up more Giannis, or play him at center, it doesn't really matter, and open up more Giannis. So, obviously Giannis is great. I have him as the highest projected play on the slate. If Jokic is out, I think Giannis is the highest projected play on the slate by a pretty big margin. But right now, at least, there's just enough mid-range guys for me that I like that and not enough really cheap value that I like that I'm not getting as much Giannis. And that goes back to, like we were talking about Boston, I was getting some Sam Hauser, but not as much as the field, for example. That's probably the type of play right now that you're making more of if you want to get to more Giannis. Bobby Portis, Brook Lopez, both showing up a little bit. I actually thought I'd be getting to a little bit more Lopez. He's been playing massive minutes lately. Bobby Portis' playing time has been down, playing like 22 minutes, give or take, in most games. Brook Lopez has been playing a ton. I went 34 minutes here, which matched my projection for Miles Turner. You could get more for Brook Lopez. I think that is certainly possible. The price tag has elevated a little bit to 6K though, which, it's not like he's the best point per minute fantasy producer, but the playing time's been great. Atlanta taking on Chicago. Pretty healthy Atlanta team now, so nobody standing out as like a clear top priority, but still guys that you can get to in a very favorable matchup against the Bulls. This team does not play defense. This game has a 1-point spread. Atlanta has the second highest team total on the board behind Boston, who obviously is in a game with a much larger spread. Jalen Johnson, 8,300, looks pretty good. He missed a game with his leg, whatever they called his leg injury, but he came back last game, immediately played like 35 minutes again. So I'm not really concerned about that. I expect him to play 35, 36 minutes. He is very, very good at producing fantasy points. So I'm happy to get to him right around the field. Trae Young getting 14% ownership at 9,200. I have less than that. This one's a little bit tougher for me. Like, obviously, Trae Young can score a lot of fantasy points. He has a high ceiling, all of that. There's no argument there. It's a great matchup. Also, no argument there. But it is a price tag that you have a lot of alternatives, and also it's a position that you have a lot of alternatives. So I'm not really surprised that I'm just getting a little bit less of him, getting some other guys. For example, if you just compare him to Halliburton in the last game, I'm saving $1,100 and getting Halliburton at similar ownership. So, I don't mind doing something like that, but at the same time, Trae Young clearly fine. 1.28 DraftKings points per minute overall this season. Chicago sucks, all of that. And then kind of just mixing and matching these other guys with Okongwu, Capella, Hunter, all at reasonable price tags around 5K. Bogdanovich at 4,700. He's getting 10% ownership. I might be a little bit light on him. I projected 24 minutes. He played 23 last game in his first game back. I don't really have a good idea how quickly Atlanta's going to ramp him up. I think you eventually probably see him in competitive games playing, 27, 28 minutes. I went 24 today. Maybe I give him an extra minute, get to 25 just so I can get a little bit more of him. But I think he's fine as a value here. 4,700, assuming he plays somewhere around 24 minutes, is going to look pretty good in what should be a high-scoring game. On the other side for Chicago, getting a lot of them as well, which is not surprising. No Patrick Williams again today, so it just opens up minutes for guys. We had Torrey Craig get the start last game. I don't know if he'll start today. He is, for lack of a better phrase, because it's ridiculous, their Giannis stopper. And so that combined with Williams being out, you got him in the starting lineup. You got him playing a bunch of minutes. He played well, though. So I'm assuming that he just stays in the starting lineup for now. I gave him 26 minutes, but his price tag already jumped up to 4,500, which made him pretty much not interesting. What was interesting, though, is that you have a 5K Ayo Dosunmu, who, if somebody other than Craig starts, I assume it's Dosunmu. But coming off the bench, I still think he's likely to play around 30 minutes, if not, a little bit more. At 5K, it looks like a pretty good price tag. Zach LaVine is popular, but at 7,400, I'm getting a lot as well. Shooting guard, small forward eligible, so you can fit him into a lot of different builds. He's still not very expensive. This is a game that is as likely as any to be competitive, which is a big deal when you talk about a Bulls team that sucks. And you've seen LaVine at times losing minutes to garbage time. 1.08 DraftKings points per minute for LaVine so far this season. 24% usage rate, 18% assist percentage, but obviously has the upside to produce at higher rates than that. Josh Giddey is showing up like 2x the field for me right now, which, whatever. I projected him in a way that I'm comfortable with, 26, 27 minutes. He does have a path, to play a little bit more without Patrick Williams. He is still at risk of not closing. You can very easily get a closing lineup with the Dosunmu over Giddey and I guess Craig in there or something. But Williams being out does increase the chances that Giddey can get an extra minute or two because you could get, Giddey, Dosunmu, White, LaVine, Vooch. And at 6K and modest ownership in this spot, I think Giddey looks pretty good. I like Vooch at 18% owned, 7,800, just obviously a very high upside play. 1.26 DraftKings points per minute is the highest on this team. 16.5% rebounding percentage, but also a 15% assist percentage, 21.5% usage rate. He's just doing it across the board here, and he's playing pretty big minutes as well. Have him projected for 34 minutes here, so I like him. And then Kobe White at 6,800. Playing time's been down a little bit recently, but he's still live to give you those games if he's playing well, where he plays, 30, mid-30s. I projected 33. That still gets him into lineups pretty close to the field. Power said, sorry if you mentioned it. What's your Claxton minutes projection? I'm assuming Claxton starts, in which case I think like 25 or 26 minutes is reasonable. I didn't go to his full playing time since he had missed a few games. If he comes off the bench, that would obviously be a bad sign for his playing time. But assuming he starts, I pretty much have him and Simmons splitting, with Claxton getting like 25, 26, Simmons getting like 24 total, assuming like 1 or 2 is alongside Claxton. 2 more games to go. No Luka Doncic for the Mavs taking on Denver. I am somehow getting to nothing here, but I think it's the pricing. There's no ownership coming into this game really because DraftKings did a good job. Kyrie is up to $9,800. He's 3% owned. If you want to play some Kyrie without Luka at low ownership against the Nuggets, by all means, go for it. But that's a very healthy price tag. And it just, it's a spot where you need to remember and need to keep in mind that everything about DFS is, it's projection, salary, and ownership. And it's not as simple as just saying Luka's out, so play Kyrie, because Kyrie is not a $9,800 player when Luka's in. He's, an 8K, 8,500, maybe 9K guy. So clearly the price tag is already factoring in Luka being out. And if you're just blindly clicking Kyrie, you're just double counting Luka being out, essentially. So I'm not getting to him, but if you just want to play him at low ownership because he's Kyrie without Luka and that ceiling is really high, then sure. But it is tough to get there at that salary. 3,900 for Hardy is somewhat interesting. 5% projected ownership. I'm getting to about 2%. He played 24 minutes last game. He did find his way into that closing lineup, which on one hand is good to see. The last game that Luka was out, not Dallas's last game. So the last game Luka was out, which was against OKC on the 17th. Jaden Hardy did close that game. He got to 24 minutes. The thing I didn't like was that he was in the closing lineup over Klay Thompson, and it's hard for me to think that is normally going to be the case. The closing lineup here, I think, is typically going to be Irving, Klay, Washington, probably one of Gafford, Lively, although it could be like Kleba, or they could go small, and then probably one of Grimes or Najee Marshall or Hardy. So I don't think it's set in stone or anything that he closes. I still projected 22 or 23 minutes. Didn't get to too much here. But certainly somebody you can take darts, throw darts at if you need a cheap guy, especially if we don't get better value opening up. PJ Washington probably playing around 30 minutes at 6K, still tough for me to get to him. So I don't really have much Dallas. Fields not getting to much Dallas. I think across the board, it's pretty much if you want to just roll the dice on somebody and hope that they have a really big game because Luka's out, that's fine. They'll be low owned, but you're also pretty much paying for Luka being out at this point. On the Denver side, this was one of the more, I think, interesting decisions I had to make before the show. Jokic is questionable still. My guess is that he doesn't play, and I initially had actually projected him to be out, in which case I would be going right back to Dario Saric, and obviously everybody else would look marginally better. Michael Porter Jr. is already up to 7,200, so that's not a cheap price tag or anything. But he would certainly look better if Jokic is out. Jamal Murray's up to 8,600, but he'll look better if Jokic is out. The reason I ended up projecting Jokic in has to do with the way that I think the field is playing so far this season. I think the field's actually playing really well as far as late swap goes, which I hate to say because I would much rather say that everybody sucks and it's really easy to make money. But I think that Sims tools have given everybody an easier way to make decent late swaps compared to when they were just reliant on optimizers and they still had to do a lot of manual work. And so what we've seen is like we had the game a week or two ago where DeAndre Ayton was questionable, and I was pretty confident Ayton wasn't going to play. I projected it that way. I ended up playing a ton of Donovan Clingan. And by the time, Ayton gets ruled out with like 3 games to go in the night, Clingan still ends up being like 25% owned. And so, he was lower owned than he would have been in that situation if we had the Ayton news ahead of time. But it wasn't like previous years where, he comes in at like 10% or something. So you're taking on, if I were to project Jokic out here, I'm taking on a lot of risk because if he's in, Saric is dead. And I might not find out if he's in until there's only 2 games left. And if he ends up being out, Saric is still going to be like 20% owned or something instead of 1%. So that's why I went that way. Also, I think that I have a good late swap process. So whenever we do get news, if we get news that Jokic is out, I'm confident that I can get to a good amount of Saric and other Denver pieces quickly and still have good lineups. So if you're somebody watching this and A, you think that Jokic is out, and then B, you think you don't have a good late swap process, there's an advantage for you probably to just like play some Saric and worry about it later if Jokic is in. But in my case, I think I'm actually better off just projecting Jokic in. Power said Luka posted him and Jokic walking together at Ball Arena today. That's interesting then, because it would mean Jokic is at least there. I know he missed practice yesterday. Not that that necessarily means anything. It wasn't a health. He hasn't been out for health related reasons. He's been out for personal reasons. So I don't think it's a big priority for Nikola Jokic to show up to practice. I don't know how much he cares about showing up for this game. But if he's in, I'm not getting to him. 12-2 is really expensive at a deep center position. If he's out, I want to get to a lot of Saric. Saric has power forward eligibility now as well. He's 5,200. I want to get to a lot of him. I don't care what happened last game. He fouled like an insane person. He had like 4 fouls in his first 10 minutes or something. You can just completely throw away his playing time last game. If Jokic is out and Saric starts, I expect him to be playing, around 30 minutes again, and he would look really, really good. But with Jokic projected in, I'm not really getting to Denver. Finally, we have Sacramento taking on the Clippers. DeMar DeRozan and Domantas Sabonis both expected back for the Kings, which makes this team basically useless. De'Aaron Fox is up to $9,400. I got him in 1 out of 150 lineups. Fields at 1%. He's really good. He can score a lot of fantasy points. He doesn't project very well for the salary. DeRozan, I assume, is going to be at least somewhat limited. I went like 34 minutes. He's averaging 36 or 37 on the season. There's no price discount on him, though. Sabonis is almost 10K, center only. Keegan Murray has somehow gotten up to 7K. I have a really difficult time getting to anything on this team. There is still no Malik Monk, which means that you could get some additional minutes for like Kevin Huerter or Trey Lyles. Lyles because they need bench scoring. Huerter because Monk frequently plays him off the floor, and now that obviously won't be happening. But the problem here is that Trey Lyles is up to 5,300 and Huerter is up to 6,300. So it's just really tough to get to anything from Sacramento at their respective salaries with DeRozan and Sabonis coming back. And then finally for the Clippers, once again, no Norm Powell. So there is some ownership coming in here. These prices haven't moved very quickly. James Harden's getting 20% ownership at 9,300. I'm right around the field there. I think that looks pretty good. Likely to get 35 minutes or so from Harden. Certainly can play more if this game does go down to the wire. 1.35 DraftKings points per minute so far this year for Harden. And that number to me is actually like kind of surprising, as in I didn't know it was that high. I think in part because the Clippers just keep getting kicked off of main slates. And so I'm kind of unaware of when Harden plays really well. But 1.35 DraftKings points per minute this year. It's not surprising in the sense that he doesn't have any teammates that do anything. 29.5% usage rate, 39.5% assist percentage, 12.5% rebounding percentage. All the opportunities in the world are out there for James Harden, and this price tag looks good, so I like that. $4,300 price tag on Chris Dunn, 4K on Amir Coffey. I assume both guys are starting. I think both guys look like pretty solid values. I have a little bit more Chris Dunn than Coffey, but if you wanted to flip that, I wouldn't argue very strongly against it. Coffey for the season, 0.69 DraftKings points per minute. Dunn, 0.87. I projected like 31 minutes for Coffey, 27 for Dunn. So I did give Coffey more minutes. I don't think that's set in stone, as far as there probably will be games where Dunn plays a little bit more. But I think that it's the correct way to project them. Dunn is the better point per minute guy, though. I got a little bit more of him, as I said. Kevin Porter, also value play at 4,200. Played about 20 minutes off the bench last game. On average, I think that's where you see him settle in. But there will probably be games where he plays more than that. He can play multiple positions, which is nice when you have somebody like Norm Powell out. He is a solid point per minute guy. He's at 1 fantasy point per minute for the season. 28% usage rate is the highest usage rate on this team, other than James Harden. 28% assist percentage is the highest assist percentage on this team, other than James Harden. And he actually has a 9.5% rebounding percentage as well. Say what you want about him as an NBA player or a human being for that matter. He's always been a solid point per minute fantasy producer. He's cheap. I think on average, like I said, probably playing around 20, 21 minutes, but has a path to more. Like, there's not a lot of super talented guys on this roster keeping Kevin Porter Jr. from playing more minutes if he's playing well. Derek Jones Jr., Nick Batum, Jordan Miller, Terrence Mann, Amir Coffey, Chris Dunn. None of these guys are players where you look at them and say, oh man, I don't know if Kevin Porter Jr. is playing well, can he actually steal a couple minutes from them? I think the answer is a resounding yes to every single one of them. So there are ways for him to get more minutes if he's playing well, which is nice. Derek Jones Jr. can play a little bit more, at least have more solidified minutes without Powell as well. Projected 26, but he is live to play a little bit more. He's only 3,600, which is a good price tag. Zubac's playing big minutes still. One negative on Zubac's here is that they do have Mo Bamba now, which, speaking of guys that you can say what you want about them as NBA players, not the best. But for a lot of this season, the Clippers have had essentially no backup center. They were using Kai Jones for a little bit. Then they scrapped that and were just using like Nick Batum. And we were seeing Zubac in competitive games give you like 36, 37, 38 minutes. So far, we've seen them use Mo Bamba basically as an actual backup. So I think expecting 33 or 34 minutes from Zubac makes more sense than expecting the 36 that we used to get. And that's enough at a rising price for him to not really show up for me. But that being said, he's only 6% owned, so it's not like he'd be a bad contrarian play. The ceiling is there, but he's not one that I'm getting to. Similarly, Mo Bamba, 3,100, not showing up for me, probably because he is center only, and you are, even if he gives you like a good point per dollar score and goes for like 19 or 20 DraftKings points, you're probably drawing dead in tournaments if you take that at center because it's not enough raw points. But he is, a good point per minute guy historically. He is getting the backup center minutes, which in theory means that if Zubac gets in foul trouble, you're just immediately getting more run for Bamba, and he is minimum salary at low ownership. So there's a tournament case for both of the centers here, but I'm not getting to either one. So that wraps things up for me on this one. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. Thank you for checking out the show. Subscribe to Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. A lot of good content over there. DFS strategy from Utical, Nerdy Tenor, Brick75, myself, helping you improve, save yourself some time and money on mistakes that we've made, things we've learned from, answering whatever questions you come up with as you work to get better at DFS. So check that out. To recap, my highest owned players right now, again, a lot of stuff up in the air with injury news. Yabusele, as a starter, is my highest projected guy right now, but no idea if he's starting. And also, if he is starting, projected ownership probably comes up, so my exposure comes down a little bit. Getting to a lot of Brooks, Keta, Halliburton, Basunmu, Turner, Houston in general, Bulls in general. So looks like a pretty interesting slate. 8 games is usually pretty fun. So hopefully things go well. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Thanks for checking out the show. And I will be back on Monday at the same time, somewhere around 4:45 or 5. Subscribe to the Endgame Syndicate channel so that you get alerts when that show goes live. Good luck again. Enjoy y'all's weekend.